Welkom bij de CD-webinar met Dr. Einat Wilf. Mijn naam is Nathan Boescher. Deze korte introductie zal in het Nederlands zijn, waarna de lezing en Q&A na afloop in het Engels zullen plaatsvinden. U kunt uw vragen al tijdens de lezing aan ons doorgeven via de VNA of Q&A-functie. Vanavond bieden wij u een bijzondere spreker aan, Dr. Einat Wilf. Van 2010 tot 2013 was zij lid van de Knesset. Ze is vooral bekend als vooraanstaand denker en auteur van 7 boeken over belangrijke politieke en maatschappelijke thema's. Sinds eind vorig jaar heeft ze haar eigen nieuwe politieke partij OS opgericht. Zij zal vanavond spreken over het actuele en prikkelende onderwerp Antizionism is for losers. Niet bedoeld als scheldwoord, maar als reële stelling. Immers heeft het zionisme gewonnen met de stichting van de staat Israël en alle oorlogen en bedreigingen sindsdien. Maar kennelijk is het antizionisme nog niet verslagen. This stimulating topic deserves further exploration, as it is not only important for understanding October 7th, but also remains a highly relevant issue in the global sphere. I would now like to give the digital floor to Dr. Einat Wilf.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your patience and for this lovely welcome. I'm doing this from Jerusalem, and I want to start by an observation that a colleague of mine, Dr. Shani Moore, told me many years ago. He said, Zionism is normal and anti-Zionism is insane. And Zionism is quite simply the political movement for self-determination of the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland. It is normal in the sense that it reflects the idea of self-determination for a people recognized as a people in the homeland that is globally recognized, to which they are attached. And in that sense, it is very much part and parcel of many, many national movements who at the same time, in the wake of multi-ethnic empires falling apart and the rise of nations and nation states to replace them, Zionism is very much a part of that. Anti-Zionism emerges as a unique phenomena that is not actually opposition to Zionism, despite its name. It is, and this is why today some people write it without a hyphen, in order to highlight that it is a unique form, I would argue, of an obsession, and the form by which an assault in Jewish life is taking place. So I will start with the definitions and then go deeper. Zionism, the political movement for self-determination of the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland. Anti-Zionism, the means by which the assault on Jewish life is taking place at the present. So anti-Zionism is actually an assault on Jewish life, and it is the current mode by which the assault on Jewish life is taking place. There are previous modes of assault on Jewish life, anti-Semitism, the traditional Judenhass of the Middle Ages, but it is an assault on Jewish life. How did I reach that conclusion? So I came to it from 2 directions. The first is I came to it actually as being an Israeli who took a lot of things for granted, an Israeli of the left, an Israeli who wanted peace. And I'm sure you know, in kind of the understanding of oneself, when you come from the left, when you are a liberal, when you support compromise, you support peace. In the context of Israel, you support a 2-state solution, you support the partition of the land between the river and the sea. You think of yourself as one of the good guys. And I remember more than 20 years ago, I gave a talk in the United States. And when one of the speakers spoke, the way that he spoke about Israel, I remember kind of being taken aback and saying, this is not about settlements, right? This is not about policy. If you had an issue with a specific policy, you wouldn't sound this way. And again, there was just something about the way he spoke, the kind of the the hatred, the visceral kind of antagonism that I thought, that's not how normal people talk about policy differences. And then I began to notice, so this kind of began to attune me to the fact that something else is going on. It's not a normal debate about, yeah, you could do this or you could do that. I think this is better. I'm not happy about you doing this. I began to be attuned to something else happening. And then I noticed that they seem to be using the same 10 words, not more. And I ultimately gave it the name, the placard strategy. Why? Because you see it, I saw it on placards in anti-Israel demonstrations. And how are these placards known? You will recognize it very easily. These placards are built like equations. The equations are very simple. Israel, Zionism, Star of David. Then there's an equation sign. And I'm sure you've seen it and you know it, that you know what's on the other side of it. It never says, how I opened my talk, Zionism equals the political movement for self-determination of the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland, which I think is a long placard, but I doubt you've ever seen it. It's been so successful that you know what it says. It says Zionism, Israel, Star of David, and then it says imperialism, colonialism, apartheid, racism, then it will escalate white supremacy, Nazism, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. Notice what I just said: imperialism, colonialism, settler colonialism, racism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, white supremacy, Nazism, genocide. This is barely 10 words. But those 10 words are the entire vocabulary of anti-Zionism. When some people tell me, I've always been wondering, you have all these sophisticated definitions, the IHRA definition for anti-Semitism, and where does anti-Zionism cross? And everyone is splitting hairs. And I'm thinking, I have a really, really simple way to know. Whenever you see this vocabulary, you know you're dealing with anti-Zionism as an assault on Jewish life. Now, what is it about this vocabulary? Why am I pointing it out? So what is it about those 10 words? Those 10 words they don't describe reality. When people use them, they try to pretend as if they are reality. But if you've been to Israel, if you know Zionism, they are the inversion of reality. If anything, the Jews have Zionism is the most anti-imperial movement, the movement that had to survive several empires, the most decolonial movement of an indigenous people, essentially throwing off the yoke of multiple colonizing empires. It is a movement that has saved Jews from conditions of racism and apartheid, of Nazism, white supremacy, ethnic cleansing, genocide. So not only do these words not reflect reality, they are the inversion of reality. And basically, the words are chosen not because they have any connection to something that describes something real. They're chosen because by now they're synonyms for evil. So the mechanism of anti-Zionism is this endless repetition. Israel, Zionism, Star of David equals evil. Israel, Zionism, Star of David equals evil. And what happens is, notice that this is something that happens all the time. About a year ago, I heard someone give a talk about how you conduct mass manipulation. There's actually a kind of almost science to it. And it works as follows. The person said, for mass manipulation, you need a few elements. You need simple messages. I spoke about that limited vocabulary of less than 10 words. Strong visual symbols. The placards are very powerful visually. And then he said repetition. Now, today we know the science, but this is something that people knew for long before that. Our brain is a pattern recognition machine. It doesn't respond to truth and reason. Those are acquired tastes. Our brain basically goes, everything that gets repeated, we begin to think of it as truth. So when things get endlessly repeated, and it's repeated in media and social media and the streets, I remember I noticed it when I was with an anti-Israel speaker on television. He had 30 seconds. It didn't matter. He said apartheid, racism, ethnic cleansing, and the answer, it didn't matter what the question was. So the repetition is endless. And then that person said, the key to mass manipulation is prestige, because prestige paralyzes judgment, right? That's why we want celebrities to advertise things we don't need, because prestige paralyzes judgment. So it's not a coincidence that this entire project gets laundered through institutions of prestige. Some of them are in your country. It is, you launder it through the UN. The United Nations will say Zionism is racism. Now, who knows that the General Assembly of the United Nations is one lousy country, one vote? The United Nations, for some bizarre reason, still retains prestige. So people say, the UN said Zionism is racism. The UN conference on racism in Durban in South Africa in 2001 said that Israel's an apartheid state. The International Court of Justice took the case of Israel's committing genocide. Who cares of what they ruled? Already you have prestige, International Court of Justice, genocide, Israel. That's all you need to launder it. And that's how you could create this mass manipulation. And that's what we're living through. We're living through anti-Zionism as mass manipulation through the repetition of this limited vocabulary in every possibility, and then laundering it through institutions of prestige, through NGOs, through academia. You will get a PhD for Zionism is colonialism. You will get tenured for Israel as an apartheid state. And it begins to be this closed system that ultimately leads to one conclusion. And we saw that conclusion after October 7th, because I've been watching those placards for so long, I notice every time there's a new one. So a new one appeared after October 7th, and it said, keep the world clean. And it had an image of a Star of David or a flag of Israel in a trash bin. So using the environmental language, keeping the world clean, and then the Star of David, flag of Israel in a trash bin. And when I saw that, I said, this is it. This is the pinnacle, the culmination of the process, the project of anti-Zionism that has been going on for decades. I describe it as metaphorical tunnels. You know, physical tunnels were dug under Gaza. Physical tunnels were dug in southern Lebanon. Metaphorical tunnels were being dug under our most hallowed institutions, the international bodies, the academia, the so-called human rights organizations. And after October 7th, on that day, both the assault moved from the physical tunnels and from the metaphorical tunnels together. And so we reached the culmination, keep the world clean. Why is that the culmination? Because if you are constantly told that there is an evil out there, and it is not just any evil, it is the ultimate evil, then the only conclusion of any person who just wants good is that that evil must be eradicated. Moreover, the world cannot be clean. The world cannot be good until that evil is eradicated. And I remember when I saw that poster, that placard, I thought to myself, this is sadly an excellent example of the complete failure of Holocaust education. Because people could be so educated about the Holocaust, and they could know what happened and when in the camps and the rise of Nazism, but how many will be able to summarize and to explain that at the basis of all of it was the view that the collective Jew stood between the world and utopia, between the world and salvation, between this dirty world and a clean world, racially clean, doesn't matter what kind of clean, but clean. This is the most ancient and most dangerous idea, certainly when it comes to Jews. When people begin to believe that what stands between them and utopia and salvation is the collective Jew. Because once you believe that on the other side of ridding the world of the collective Jew stands salvation, utopia, then anything is justified by any means necessary. That was a very common phrase after October 7th. So this is one way that I began to look at the rise of anti-Zionism. And then about 7 years ago in London, I participated in a debate in London whether anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And it was a very hostile crowd, London. And of course, I lost the debate. We lost, we were a team. And what I remember most, and of course, you only need to bring a Jewish person on the other side. That's why they're so valuable, who says, no, anti-Zionism has nothing to do with Jews. And that's why, again, they're so valuable. When it was announced that we lost the debate, the glee in the audience had a pre-pogrom Eve energy to it. There was something sinister there. It wasn't just a normal debate. When people are like, oh, you think we should have tariffs, you think we shouldn't have tariffs, thank you very much, you made great arguments. This was, again, it had this pre-pogrom Eve energy. There was something sinister going on. So I decided to go home and do some more research and ask a different question. Not at exactly what point is anti-Zionism taking the exact same format of 19th and early 20th century anti-Semitism. I decided to ask a different question. What happens to Jews, actual Jews, when anti-Zionism becomes the ideology of a place, the ideology of a country, legislated, institutionalized? What happens to Jews? And here what I noticed is that the record is without exception. Everywhere that anti-Zionism became the dominant ideology of a country, a political party, a place, the process was this. First, Jewish life became very difficult. The environment became very hostile to Jewish life. And then the Jews left. Because the way that the playbook works, and now you're seeing it play out in the West, but it's been played out in the Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe, in the Arab world, in Iran. It goes like this. First, you criminalize Zionism. You turn Zionism into this evil thing, and you even actually criminalize it. You know, Arab countries didn't criminalize being Jewish. They criminalized Zionism. The laws on their books were against Zionists. But then they blamed Jews for being Zionists. And the thing is this, Jews, however hard they try, and some try very hard, they can't shake off this charge of being a Zionist. First of all, every Jew is suspect to begin with. And then they may have just been at a wedding and spoke of Zion and promised not to forget it. Or maybe they just celebrated Passover. So the idea is first criminalize Zionism, make it so evil, then charge the Jews with Zionism, and that's how you mount an assault on Jewish life. This is why anti-Zionism is not actually about Israel or Zionism, and it took me a really long time to understand that it has nothing to do with Israel and Zionism or with this or that government. It is a project and the means by which an assault on Jewish life everywhere is taking place. And this is what anti-Zionism does. This is what it does to Jewish life. Now, why did I ultimately coin the idea that anti-Zionism is for losers? Because once you understand that anti-Zionism is merely the respectable replacement for the ideology, the system of assault on Jewish life, it's the respectable replacement for the discredited Tsarist Nazi anti-Semitism, which in its own time was the respectable replacement for the discredited religious Judenhass. When you understand that, you realize that when does anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism grip societies? You could argue that it's always there, but when does it rise to the level of insanity and obsession? It happens when societies are in crisis, when societies lose their sense of certainty, of leadership, their sense of confidence. They're in different forms of crises: financial, political, identity, technological. And when a society is in crisis, the sociologist, anthropologist René Girard said that a society in crisis asks two questions: what to do and who to blame. Now, he said both questions are important. Who to blame is an important way sometimes to galvanize society, to mobilize it. But ultimately, a society that gets stuck on who to blame and does not move to what to do and answer that, basically spirals out of control into destruction. Because ultimately, societies that are not losers, they answer what to do, and they do it. And they emerge from the crisis. So anti-Zionism is essentially a self-reinforcing ideology of failed societies. It is the ideology of societies that constantly focus on who to blame rather than on what to do. And that's why they never emerge. You see it across the Arab world. You see it across the Arabs who identify as Palestinians. You've seen it in the Soviet Union. You've seen it when Eastern Europe was at the height of its anti-Zionist craze in the 60s. You see it in Iran, of course. You see it across, as I said, the Arab world. And you're now seeing it in the West as the West goes through a crisis of technology, identity, certainty. They grasp at the oldest certainty in the world, that the Jews did it. But you're seeing that this is leading society not to come up with good solutions for its problems, but to focus on why the Jews are to blame. Now, particularly in that, I want to also say that the other way that anti-Zionism appears in this world is through the ideology that I've come to call Palestinianism, which is supposedly its positive side. Because it's not a coincidence that all the negative, truly evil words are on the side of Israel, Zionism, Starve David, and all the good words, freedom, justice, equality, rights, are on the side of its negation, Palestinianism. And I'm sure some of you have seen placards that said, queers for Palestine, feminists for Palestine, Palestine is fighting climate change, Palestine is fighting capitalism. And you're thinking, okay, these people are morons. They don't understand that society, they should go there. But it's, again, it's not about the Arabs living in Gaza and the West Bank, if it ever was. Palestine has become the abstract marker of a world without the collective Jew. The symbol from the river to the sea. You get rid of the collective Jew, you reach utopia. And this is why Palestine now stands for everything that people think is good. So it's queer rights or feminism or fighting capitalism, it will be Palestine. This is why you're seeing it everywhere in the so-called do-gooder circles, because it's become the abstract embodiment of utopia, of salvation, of the world without the collective Jew. But again, ultimately, it's the ideology of failed societies that prefer to focus on who to blame rather than what to do. So I'll end with this argument of mine and vision, that my argument is that I wrote a book, a collection of essays that had the title, "We Should All Be Zionists." And it had several arguments, one of them about Jews reclaiming their Zionism as a way to kind of repel the bullies who use anti-Zionism as a way to assault Jewish life and bully Jews, but also for the Arab world to argue that all the decades that the Arab world had spent, the resources, the time, the mental energy on anti-Zionism have been a waste, and that it's not a coincidence that a more successful country like the Emirates, a country that actually demonstrates what it looks like to be a successful Arab and Muslim that built something that is patriotic, that is looking to the future, that is building an economy. They don't need anti-Zionism because they don't need to explain their failures because they're not failing. So you actually see in the Arab world, you have a wonderful example why a society that is not failing doesn't need anti-Zionism and throws it away because it is for losers. But a lot of the other losers keep hanging to anti-Zionism because it's the one thing that continues to make them feel good about their failure, about the failure of their society. And I think another thing that we're seeing in the West is I don't think it's a coincidence that at the moment that the West is losing its confidence, it's falling into a kind of infantilization of everyone's oppressing me and I'm a victim, and making victimhood the thing to be proud of. And my pinned tweet is that Zionism is a progressive movement that had the misfortune of success because the Jews actually tried to fix problems rather than whine about their problems all day. But in a society that elevates being a victim, whining, never trying to solve problems, but just blaming other people for why your life is terrible, I don't think it's a coincidence that societies in the West that are becoming more infantilized are also embracing Palestinianism because it's an ideology of infantilizing people to just constantly blame others, but never solve problems for yourselves. And this is what anti-Zionism is. This is why it's for losers. And I'm happy to answer your questions, and apologies for the technical problems.
Thank you, Einat. We have a few questions from our viewers. You say the Western world is a society in crisis, a failed society. What do you see as the solution to this, if there is any?
In many ways, and that is, by the way, that is my greatest concern, because once you understand that it is a societal problem, because there's a moment, I remember the moment that I asked myself, if you look at moments when there was the most massive assault on Jewish life in history, did the Jews do something different? Were the Jews of the 11th century different than the Jews of the 10th century that explains the massacres of the 11th century? And of course, the answer is no. The problem was that the church was in crisis and it had the Crusades and they massacred the Jews on the way to Jerusalem. But it's not that the Jews were suddenly different and they did something different. And that Germany was in crisis. It's not that its Jews suddenly were different. So when you understand that the question is not, oh, what did the Jews do this time? The question is, what is the problem with the society that experiences the rise in this kind of mass manipulation, this obsession with the idea that the collective Jew is the reason they are failing? You realize that the problem is with the society. And the problem that we have is a timing problem. Because yes, societies can ultimately fix themselves, but sometimes by the time they fix themselves, the damage to the Jews is done. So the question is, will the West fix itself before too much damage is done to the Jewish people? And I have to say that on this, I think almost everything rests with America. Because let me put it this way. By now, it's gone global, okay? If I talked about the playbook of anti-Zionism, then the Jewish response was always to leave. But now that Jewish response is not really available anymore. So a lot of Jews are leaving from Canada to Miami, from New York to Miami, from Venezuela to Miami. Some are leaving for Israel. But at one point, that's it. It's gone global. So we are actually at a unique and dangerous moment where the usual Jewish playbook of just going somewhere else is not available because of technology and communications. It is global. I was in Australia 6 months before the Bondi Beach massacre, and the Australian Jewish community, they told me, and it was heartbreaking, they said, Einat, we were supposed to be the place that is so far that it doesn't come here, that it's just, we're too far for anyone to care. And they were like, but it's here. And they said that 6 months before the massacre. So it's now gone global, which means that the old response of just leaving is not really a response that we can have as a Jewish people, maybe here and there individuals, but not as a people. And then the question is, which societies can emerge from this crisis before causing too much damage to the Jewish people? And I have to say, I'm not sure I see it in Europe. I'm not sure I'm seeing it within Europe, in France, in Britain, in the large Jewish communities. Not really in Canada. Australia is small, not in South Africa. And this really pretty much leaves the United States, and within the United States, a few states, Florida, maybe Texas. And the question is, will they be able to hold the fort? Will America be the one country that is truly exceptional because of the American claim to exceptionalism? You know, there was a viral video after October 7th that for me, almost everything is in that video. It was in New York. There were these entitled, overeducated college students who were tearing down the posters of the hostages, especially the children. And two construction workers who were working there, one was Hispanic, I think, one was Black. They looked at that and they said, stop it. It's not right. Stop it. And I remember looking at that and thinking, I sincerely hope this is still America. Because as long as there is enough of that in America, they'll be able to turn the tide for the West, that kind of basic ability to see this and say, it's not right, stop it. But I think for us, we have to do two things. One, and it's a tough message, but I think it's important. Right now, the Jews have to take care of the Jews. And this is a tough message, especially when I bring it in America and Canada, because there the Jews have come to think of themselves as just these allies to everybody else, the people of human rights and social justice, and their allies will betray us and they will still want to be allies to them. And the idea that the Jews have a solidarity with the Jewish people, that there is an importance to investing our resources, our time in the Jewish people, is something that for a lot of Jews in the West, especially young ones, this is a really, really tough message that they feel very difficult with. You know, they are universal Jews, even though everyone tells them differently. And so that's one thing. You know, the museums, the hospitals, the orchestras, they'll be fine. Right now, all the resources of the Jews have to go to Jews, however which way you think you want to deploy those resources. And the other thing is we need to reach out to our allies, and we do have allies, those who understand that something is wrong, and we need to let them know what I just said here, that anti-Zionism is a systemic assault on Jewish life using that vocabulary of 10 words, and that wherever they see those 10 words, they should shut it down.
Okay, we're getting many questions now. Many of them were actually about the topic you addressed more lately. How can we fight back, if I paraphrase it? If I summarize it, it's giving Jewish means to Jewish life on the one hand. And the second one is to find allies. What else is there to do? What language can we use to fight back? And how do we win back the West?
So again, the only language that I know to use is to let the people of the West know how this playbook works. Because I've noticed a phenomena, especially when I visit students in the United States. I noticed that the students who are most confident in fighting anti-Zionism, standing up for the Jewish people, I noticed that they are disproportionately, not only, but disproportionately, they will be Jews whose families came to the West from the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, the Arab world, and Iran. Why? Because for them, they still have the muscle memory. They're only one generation removed from this playbook. And I actually have students who tell me, my parents told me that they heard all of this nonsense. We have nothing against Jews. It's only about Zionism. It's about colonialism, imperialism, apartheid. They were like, we've heard it all before in the Soviet Union, in the Arab world, in Iran. We're not falling for that a second time. So for them, they have the muscle memory. So they're not falling for this playbook. They know to stand against this assault, and they can tell other people how it ends because they lived through it. The problem we have for Jews who do not have this muscle memory is that they don't know that this is how it works, and they find it very hard to believe. It's easier for them to believe that this is really just about Israel and Zionism and Bibi and what this government did. And they don't know that it's a playbook that had nothing to do with Israel and Zionism and which government and whether Israel was occupying territory or making peace. It had nothing to do with it. They don't know it. They have not been educated to it. I just published a book that's called Teaching Zionism that is based on my course in Georgetown about Zionism and anti-Zionism. It has also been created as a 5-part YouTube miniseries. Use it to educate yourself, use it to educate others about how anti-Zionism actually works. Because what happened, I'm sure many of you in high school had to learn Kafka's Metamorphoses. And I'm sure certainly as high school students, you think to yourself, okay, this is a stupid or this is a weird idea. A man wakes up one morning and they're a giant, disgusting insect, and all the analysis is about this is the alienation of modern life. after October 7th, I understood Kafka's metamorphosis in a way I never did before. Because Jews in the West, especially young Jews, they grew up their life to think that being Jewish is easy and fun and prestigious. And the Jews are a people with a great history of social justice and tikkun olam and humor and movies and bagels, and they're wealthy and they get accepted to the best universities. So their experience is that being Jewish is a privilege. They're susceptible to that language. And then they wake up one morning, literally one morning, they wake up and they are yelled at for being genocidal baby killers. And they're like, me? What? Where? I'm still the same person inside. I want values. I want justice. I want social justice and tikkun olam. But they're being yelled at for being genocidal baby killers. And someone once said about Kafka that he never mentioned the word Jew in any of his books, but he wrote of nothing else. So whether it's the Metamorphosis, whether it's the Trial, that's the Jewish condition. Now, a lot of young Jews don't know that it's the Jewish condition. They really think that the last 50 years were normal. And what happens is that they wake up one morning and suddenly the Jewish condition is back to where it always was. But for them, that's crazy. Suddenly the price of being Jewish is very high. I would say it's normal, but to them, it's insanely high. And the price of selling out your people, the rewards for that are also tremendous. You'll get to be published in the New York Times. You'll get tenured. You'll be a star student. So Jews who are not practiced in the art of being Jewish wake up one morning, the price of being Jewish from their perspective increased very suddenly to very high levels. The rewards for selling out your people are also tremendous. So you're always going to find Jews who basically buckle under the pressure and they sell out their people and they start writing books about genocide because they don't know what it's like to actually be Jewish. So I think another aspect is not just for the resources to go to Jewish life, is to actually educate ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, that this is the Jewish condition. What they're experiencing right now is sadly normal.
Thank you. Another question. I think the blood labels, I'm reading now the question, genocide, etc., generate the deepest hate and aggression. Do you agree? And why do the media participate so overwhelmingly in spreading all those blood libels?
Okay. So first, it's important to know that this was built very methodically. I encountered the genocide libel already 15 years ago. By now, there's been research that the genocide libel has already been promoted in the 70s. The vocabulary that I mentioned, look at the work of Isabella Tabarovsky, was created by the Soviet Union. I sometimes joke that Tsarist Russia and the Soviet Union don't get enough credit for taking Jew hate global. They found that it's an effective way to take down, in the case of Tsarist Russia, to take down Germany, in the case of the Soviet Union, to take down the West, even though they may no longer exist. They've already inserted the poison, the virus, into the blood kind of veins of the West, where it is now working. Now, so it's not that any of this is new. It's just that a lot of people were surprised by how intense and big it was. But if, like me, you saw the metaphorical tunnels being built, then you're not surprised. This was not all of a sudden. This was created over time, laundered through institutions of prestige, repeated in various forums. Now, as again, my wise colleague, Dr. Shini Moore says, why do these libels spread? He says this is a demand issue, not a supply. Why do you think Palestinianism, for example, needs so many laws? Why do they need to bring images of children from Yemen, from Syria? Why do they need to use AI? Because what they have is they don't have supply. They don't actually have images of famine and genocide. They don't have those images. So there's no supply for the libels, but there's massive demand. So when there's massive demand, you just create lies in order to provide for the demand. Because you don't actually have the supply, but the demand is there. And the demand, again, goes back to the crisis, to the failure, to the desire for certainty at an uncertain time. And this is why the media participates in it, because ultimately it responds to incentives and it responds to the massive demand. Another aspect is also that whenever kind of terrible crimes are committed against Israel, this is also a wise observation of Dr. Shani Moore, in order to cover up for those crimes, one has to retroactively claim that Israel has been doing something worse. So during the massacres that were called the Second Intifada, the one that is now globalized, right? The blowing up of buses, all that. During that time, the apartheid libel spread very quickly. This is Durban, 2001. Why? Because against the massacring of Jews by means of suicide bombers, you had to invent a crime that would justify retroactively this horrific behavior. And against the invasion and massacre of October 7th, you had to retroactively claim that Israel was doing something so horrific that it retroactively justifies what was being done to it. A lot of what we see around anti-Zionism is reversal of cause and effect, retroactively trying to paint. And of course, the biggest retroactive is, of course, the Holocaust. Europe still, and the West still, with all the museums and the speeches, cannot handle that the West at its apex, with the greatest education, literacy, equality, committed the worst crime in human history, the industrial elimination and annihilation of a whole people for being that people. Not in war, not massacring people in war, premeditated, industrialized, final solution based on the secularized version of salvation and utopia. The West still hasn't come to terms with that, and therefore grasps at Palestinianism, anti-Zionism, to retroactively find release and justification for what they did.
Thank you. You said earlier that the threat of anti-Zionism is global and drawing Jews to just a few safe havens in the world. This means Jews in and outside Israel are at risk, and moreover, they are outnumbered. Do you have any realistic hope for the future?
So I'll start by saying that I have my dark moments when I slide into a very dark place and say, what chance do we have? You know, where, as you said, we're outgunned, we're outnumbered, people have literally gone insane, educated people, serious people, actually believe that the collective Jew stands between them and a better world. If you peel off all the language, they've really come to believe it. The world is now in the grip of insanity and mass manipulation. And the Jews and our allies stand and saying, you're all crazy. So yes, that is scary, and I often go to dark places and questioning where this will lead and whether a few safe havens, whether the West will again fix itself in time in order to emerge from this insanity, to be the place that says, not here, we're not falling for this. We're not going to let anti-Zionism play the full arc until the Jews are gone. So there is a real danger, and that's why I said we need to plan for it and prepare for it. We need to work with allies to try to buy time, to try to fight it back. But I will say that my source of optimism these days is a joke that someone told in a talk that goes like this. So God has had it with the world and humanity, this time for good. He wants to flood humanity, and this time there will be no Noah, no ark, no animals on the ark. And he's giving humanity 2 weeks, those that believe in him. So the Christians get together and they try to atone for their sins, hoping that God will change his mind. And the Muslims get together, hoping that if they become more pure, God will change his mind. And the Jews get together and they say, okay, we got 2 weeks to learn to live underwater. So it's become my new favorite go-to joke because it reflects a certain spirit that says, yes, a flood may be coming. October 7th was literally called a flood, but we'll figure it out. This is what we do. But yeah, I think we can only, though, figure it out by really understanding how dangerous it truly is.
Your new found party, Oz, has 3 main goals or visions. One of them has to do with the Arab and Palestinian embrace of Zionism. I think you touched upon that very briefly. Since the vast majority of the populations in those countries are anti-Zionist, if not anti-Semitic, how realistic, again, is it to put it as one of the main goals of your party, the Arab and Palestinian embrace?
So the reason that I put it in many ways as the first kind of pillar of Oz party is because that is the vision that the Jewish people and Israeli leadership must have. And it comes from understanding the dangers. When you understand that there's no neutral territory, maybe once there was neutral territory, there isn't anymore. You're either an anti-Zionist, and if you're not, then you're a Zionist. That's it. Like anything in the middle is gone. You might not think of yourself as a Zionist, but if you're not obsessing about the destruction of the Jewish state, you're a Zionist. If you're not participating in those 10 words, you're a Zionist. That's it. Again, you might not like this description, but I put you in this bucket. So once you understand that there's no neutral territory, then it becomes obvious that there's only one corrective vision to the global anti-Zionism. The corrective vision is Zionism. The corrective vision is to say, stop being insane, stop being crazy, and be Zionist, which is, again, it's not just about supporting the Jewish right to self-determination. Zionism is also an attitude. Anti-Zionism is who to blame. Zionism is what to do. Zionism is my joke about the flood. It's the thing that says, okay, it's lousy, it's terrible. What are we going to do? It's not, oh, poor me, everyone's to blame. So when I say that the vision is for the world, for everyone, for Arabs to be Zionist, it's not just to actually leave us alone and support the Jewish right to self-determination in our ancestral homeland. It means that you actually become a mature people. You grow up. You're not infantiles who constantly blame others for your problems. It's okay if you're a kid. It's not normal for adult people to build an entire infantile culture around blaming others. It's terrible. So for me, the notion of Arab Zionism is, again, it's not just about supporting Israel or the Jewish right to self-determination. It's about attitude. It's about Arabs who focus on building for themselves rather than destroying what the Jews have built. What can be better? So before you even ask the question of, is it realistic? I say it's not, it's first of all, it's the only alternative vision. There's nothing else. The only alternative vision to an insane anti-Zionist world is Zionism. How realistic it is, I actually don't care. Sometimes people tell me what you describe is never going to happen. So I always tell people never is a very long time. And what I tell people is even if you think it's never going to happen, it's still the right thing to do. Because every day that we wake up and mobilize our resources to make the world a little more Zionist, and especially our enemies, is a day where we make it harder for our enemies to undermine Zionism, to mount an assault on Jewish life. Because if they're doing this and we're doing this, even if at the end we're just drawing a tie, that's already better if we do this and they're just pushing, which is what we've been doing for a very long time. So for me, this is the only alternative vision. There's actually no other. And it doesn't actually matter if it's realistic or not. I would argue that it's the only realistic plan for chipping away at their horrific ideology. And I don't think about it as 0 as 1. Either they're anti-Zionist or Zionist. Even if we can move them 0.5 percentage point, 1/10 of a percentage point, that's already a better world to live in.
How about, maybe we end with this question, how about Zionism within Israel? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that. Obviously, many people are maybe not even talking about it. They are living the Zionist dream by itself. You also see many Israelis, especially from the more secular parts of Israel, don't necessarily see themselves even as Jews because they are born in a majority of Jews. Only they feel that when they are leaving the country. How is the ideology of Zionism doing within the borders of Israel?
So definitely, you can see it even in politics now. That is the discourse, we want a Zionist government. This is kind of, are you a Zionist and anti-Zionist? This is very much the discourse. But I think it's even something more foundational. Another book of mine that came out, I've been doing a lot of writing since October 7th, is called Peace Not Now. And it just came out also in English and French. And it basically looks at Israel's history as 3 stages. The building, the foundational part of building the capital and making Israel really this country that holds territory and economy and military allies. Then the kind of part where we start living off the interests, and ultimately when we start basically taking shark loans and doing this and endangering our future. Now, I'm sure Ibn Khaldun's version of civilizations, the cycle of civilizations that has been popularized on the internet as hard times make strong leaders make good times make soft leaders make hard times, and again. So what we've had is good times that made soft, mediocre leaders. They've created terrible hard times. And from those terrible hard times, I believe we are now living through the emergence of what will become good leaders who understand Israel's challenges, who understand the Jewish challenges, who understand the dangers, who are not lying to ourselves long before we talk to the world. We need to stop selling ourselves lies and comforting stories about what our enemies want. And again, this is where I see the hope, the resilience in the fact that from the hard times, we have I have a colleague, Yonatan Adiri, who has this notion of, he calls it founding grandchildren, the idea that, again, we're living through this neo-foundational age for Zionism, where the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren will be the ones who will need to rebuild after so much has been destroyed by people who are soft and careless and didn't realize that Zionism was still a remarkably fragile project.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilf, for addressing this important theme. We've learned a lot from your lecture, and we wish you lots of success in the next Israeli elections.
Thank you.
Toda rabba.
Toda, toda.
Famous last words in Dutch. Sidi zet zich al decennia lang in voor een reëel en eerlijk beeld van en over Israël. Daarnaast zijn wij de antisemitisme-waakhond van Joods-Nederland. Om deze en meer activiteiten en lezingen mogelijk te maken, hebben wij uw steun nodig. Word vriend van Sidi of geef ons een eenmalige gift. Ga naar sidi.nl en klik op de button Steun ons. Dank u wel voor uw aanwezigheid en tot de volgende keer. Lietroot.